Hey guys, we've got some things to catch up on. Obviously it's been a minute, so today let's just talk about the things that I acquired and read in the month of March. I'm currently filming this at the start of June. Will it go up in June? Let's hope so. Let's hope so. Mainly my absence from YouTube has just been vibes. I've just not been feeling it. Even reading to a certain extent this year. I am behind on my reading goals, but that means nothing. I'll just read some, normal size books instead of some fantasy size books, and I'm sure I'll catch up. Not a big deal, but I miss you guys. So let's talk about books. Now, this pile over here, can you see that? Is it in focus? There we go. That's some of it. Come back here and put me back in focus. So let's talk about what's on that pile. Thank goodness I have a template in Notion for how these videos run, because I would be so completely lost at this point. So let's dig out the books that I read. Oh man. Oh, I'm having regrets. This pile is also really scary. Ash said to me the other day, do you like living in danger? And I was like, it's actually... Oh, it's all falling apart in my lap. It's actually a little scary. All right, one. All right. The pile is still there, it's just smaller. Bear with me because it is now a couple of months since I read these books. But the first one is actually one that I had on Kindle. It's called The Book of Days by Francesca Kay. Let me find you a blurb. Imagine if I got organized to make these videos. Storygraph. Oh, Storygraph search really annoys me. Like, I've searched the title of a book that is in my collection that I have reviewed and it does not come up. You'd think it would prioritize things that I have interacted with before. Maybe they're working on it. Okay, now I came across this book because Books and Things, who is Katie Lumsden, talked about it as part of being longlisted for the Walter Scott Prize for Historical Fiction, which is a historical fiction book published in the UK. I think that's the criteria. That's how I found her channel in the first place, because I was like, I wonder if there's a prize for historical fiction. Of course there is. And she reads all of the long list every year and shares her thoughts on the books. This was the only one that caught my interest off the long list as she described it. So that's how we came to this. I'm reading off the screen behind you. Things change. We have to recognize that. The world will not stay still. What we must hope is that the new is better and stronger than the old. Anno Domini 1546. In a manor house in England, a young woman feels the walls are closing round her while her dying husband is obsessed by his vision of a chapel where prayers will be said for his immortal soul. As the days go by and the chapel takes shape, the outside world starts to intrude. And as the old ways are replaced by the new, the people of the village sense a dangerous freedom. The Book of Days is a beautifully written novel of lives lived in troubled times and the solace to be found in nature and the turning seasons. So this is written in the style of journal entries. They're dated, some things like a feast name or, 4 days after this mass, that sort of thing, which is normal dating system of the time. This 1546 is early modern England. I'm pretty sure that Mary or Elizabeth is queen now. Oh, Henry. Last days of Henry VIII. He died in 1547. So we're talking Reformation here, which is where Henry... You might know this, but if you don't, Henry VIII split the English church away from the Catholic church. So it's basically like copy-paste, but Henry's head. And as part of that, they took away all the wealth of the monasteries and closed a lot of monasteries. And so this is a period of religious turbulence where the faith that you grew up with is not the faith you're allowed to practice anymore. And the ways in which you practice your faith are not allowed to be practiced that way anymore. So our POV character, and I can't remember her name because you only hear it a couple of times in like the last third of the book, because she's writing it. Why would she write her name? Her husband is dying pretty much this whole time. And so she's in that liminal space between life and death always. And is he going to get well? Is he going to die? Like, obviously we all die at some point. She's a young wife. She's his second wife. She's had a baby at the start of the novel who passed away after a couple of days, which, again, normal, but she's grieving even when socially she should be moving on. You know, grief doesn't work like that. And then her husband, who is ill and dying, means that it's unlikely that she will have another baby because of the state that he's in. So she's in this in-between state of living and dying as well, because she doesn't know what will happen to her when her husband dies, and her stepdaughter, who hates her, is then king of the castle, essentially. Her husband is building a tomb on the side of the church for him and his family so that prayers can be said for him after he's dead, which is normal for people with money at the time and normal for people with money who have guilt on their conscience and want to be assured of a good afterlife. But this is becoming prohibited under the new laws regarding how to practice faith. So there's that. And then she spends a lot of time just outside experiencing the seasons. The book goes for 18 months or so. And just the solidity of the cycle of the year versus the entire upheaval of her life, of her faith, of her community because of all these other changes. I gave it 4 stars, which means I did actually really like it. It's very insular and religion focused, and I like that sort of thing. I did empathize with our main character and the other characters around. And I think, Kelly, you would like it. I think you should read it. Then I read one that was longlisted for the Stella Prize in Australia. The Stella Prize is just a work of literature, poetry, play, non-fiction, fiction written by a woman or non-binary person, I think. Definitely not men, but everyone else in Australia. So you see why I picked that up. The cover is just amazing. So this is Emily Maguire's Rapture. The blurb is going to need my glasses. So the blurb here is: the motherless child of an English priest living in 9th century Mainz. Oh, man. Agnes is a wild and brilliant girl with a deep, visceral love of God. At 18, to avoid a future as a wife or nun, Agnes enlists the help of a lovesick Benedictine monk to disguise herself as a man and devote her life to the study she is denied as a woman. So begins the life of John the Englishman, a matchless scholar and scribe of the revered Fulda Monastery, then a charismatic heretic in an Athens commune and, by her middle years, a celebrated teacher in Rome. There Agnes, as John, dazzles the church hierarchy with her knowledge and wisdom and finds herself at the heart of political intrigue in a city where gossip is a powerful and deadly currency. And when the only person who knows her identity arrives in Rome, she will risk everything once again to feel what it is to be known and loved. This is a story of Pope Joan. Pope Joan is not real, just an urban myth. But if Pope Joan was real, how did we get her? That is this story. It is the story of Agnes, who, because she's an only child and her father is a priest, she gets an education at a young age. And then when he dies, she finds that she's not satisfied with becoming a wife. And so she conspires with her friend and lover to join a monastery. And she's happy to live that life, but then, of course, events propel her forward in her journey towards becoming Pope. I mean, that's spoilers, but that is the story of Pope Joan. I found it very much like... Where is it? I found it a lot like Lauren Groff's The Vaster Wilds, and if you've read that or if you think you would be interested in that, this is very similar in the way that the story progresses. It's just one foot in front of the other, keep moving, keep living. And I actually listened to about half of this. I was swapping between them, and the audio, who narrated it? The audio was great, and that's because the the shape and the sound of the words is one of the strengths of this book. So I guess you could call it like lyrical, literary, blah, blah, blah. The narrator was Rose Ackroyd. So did I enjoy it? I enjoyed listening to it. It was, if you're interested in the way that medieval religious lived, so religious in this sense means people who monks lived in religious orders. That's a lot of that, the politicking that happens inside monasteries. So she moves to Greece and lives more of a philosophical hermit life. And then she moves to Rome, where the seat of power is and the opulence of power. So all of that I think is super interesting if you, like me, are interested in medieval religion. As a story on its own, it wasn't as strong. Interesting, but not as strong. I didn't really... Once I cottoned on to the fact it was Pope Joan, then I knew how it was going to end. And so I wasn't scared for anything that was going to happen because I know the urban myth of Pope Joan. So there's that. Did not get shortlisted for the Stella Prize, and understandably it's not strong enough work, in my opinion. Next up was The City and the City by Miéville. Now, I bought all these books in March as well, by the way. This was amazing. I loved it. It's weird. I picked this one up because it was a book club pick, and no regrets because it was great. The cover is also really good. In fact, spoilers, I've picked up more China Miéville, and they also have this motif on the cover. Oh, I'm going to have regrets. Hang on. This was at the bottom of the pile. So I like that the motif is the same in all of them. Anyway, The City and the City. The blurb says, when the body of a murdered woman is found in the extraordinary decaying city of Basel, somewhere at the edge of Europe, it looks like a routine case for Inspector Theodore Bourlou of the Extreme Crime Squad. But as he probes, the evidence begins to point to conspiracies far stranger and more deadly than anything he could have imagined. Soon his work puts him and those he cares for in danger, and Bourlou must travel to the only metropolis on earth as strange as his own, across a border like no other. So it's a detective procedural, which I love. I love a crime mystery with a detective. And it's the kind of detective story where the solving the crime is more important than getting to know the detective. There's two distinct camps that I find in mysteries like that. The conceit of the book here is that the city that Bourlou lives in is the same city as is literally the same space as a different city that's a different country. There's two city-states. One is, what are they called? Basel. And the other one is Ulcoma. I didn't listen to it, so I'm just guessing there. And they're physically the same space, but they're bureaucratically different cities, different city-states, different countries. To cross from one city to the other, you go into a building, you go through customs, you chuck a Yui, you come back the other side in the other city country. So because the crime crosses international borders, Bourlou has to travel between the cities. There's also this great concept of seeing and unseeing. So if you look in the street and the building next to where you are is in the other city, you can't see it. You have to unsee it, which, thought policing is just chef kiss science fiction. I love a dystopian like that. And so the concept of knowing something's there and deliberately not seeing it, unseeing it, is the point of the novel. And I guess if it's hard to imagine, then I think you would struggle with the novel. But that was the best part. I loved it. And then Bourlou has to travel between the cities to solve the crime, work with the corresponding detectives in the other city, And when he's in the other city, he can't see his city. He has to unsee it. And if you do cross those lines, then you get threatened with the breach, which is like this mystical force that will literally pluck you up and take you out. Wild. Absolutely great. Absolutely loved it. No spoilers from there on. The slow unraveling of the cities, because Bezel is quite clearly an analogue for Eastern Europe after the war, World War II, and Ulcoma is analogue for Western Europe after the war. So to have them interact like that is obviously, the juxtaposition there is a nice metaphor, an obvious metaphor, which I like. And then outsiders coming to the cities and not understanding, not having grown up and been indoctrinated with the unseeing, and so their opinions on the whole thing as well. I had such a good time that I bought many China Miéville books based on this. And then the last one I read in March was a reread of this one, Tigana by Gavriel Kay. It's very shiny. This copy came from my cousin, so it is vintage. It says fantasy classic, but this edition is also vintage. This was first published in 1990, and this edition from 1998. So it's nearly 30 years old. Tigana is the story of memory and magic. And what happens here is this peninsula in an analogue of the Mediterranean, of Italy probably, but, you know, secondary world fantasy. These two wizards come from overseas vying for each of their countries to overpower this peninsula and gain complete control. And they do it with magic. But they're kept in check with each other because they hold equal parts. And while they both live, that balance is maintained. But when one of the wizards came over, there was one of the provinces who killed his son in the battle. And so the wizard cursed the province with not being remembered, being wiped from memory. If you weren't born in Tigana when this magic happened, you wouldn't remember that it was called that. You wouldn't remember the history of the place. You would just think of it of a little backwater country that it has become. This book focuses on people from Tigana who are trying to reclaim their legacy and the memory of who they are as a people and a culture. So we switch between someone who hadn't heard of Tigana. He's from Tigana but was taken away as a baby after the fall. And so he comes across these people who are fighting, politicking and doing machinations to kill the wizards so they can get Tigana back. But it's more fraught because if they have to kill both wizards at once. Otherwise the other wizard will take control of the whole thing. So it's a difficult prospect. But then we also follow the story of a woman who came from Tigana, and she infiltrates the palace of the wizard who did the magic, the forgetting magic. She infiltrated the palace in order to be able to kill him, but then accidentally falls in love with him. So that becomes a complication. So it's those two forces. But at the same time, it is pure Gavriel Kay in that small people doing small actions in the broader scheme of things, how do their actions affect the world? But also how do the events that are happening in the world affect their lives? That's all his books are like that. That's why I love them so much. There's the magic element, which is more overt in this one than anything else I've read by him. He does have a straight up fantasy series called the Fionvar Tapestry, which I've not read. So of the books of his that I have read, this one is the most overtly magic focused. The rest of his books, like, they're magical realism. Magic happens in the world, but it's not something that you can affect. Where in this one, there's literal wizards. I got to a point where I knew what was going to happen in the end, and that was great because it's a reread. And then that didn't happen and the story kept going. And I was like, what? What is happening here? Did I read this book before? So that was nice to have a completely different ending than what I expected. And that's the power of brain fog and poor memory, I guess. There is an interview. Is it printed at the end of this? It's definitely at the end of the audiobook. Yeah. Where Kay says that the concept of this came from Soviet photoshopping, and I forget what they call it. My goodness. Just like erasing people from history when they pissed off the Soviet bureaucracy and reclaiming that. So that's the books that I read in March. We had Rapture, which was published in 2024. That's why it was eligible for the Walter Scott Prize. No, it was eligible for the Stella Prize. We had The Book of Days, which was published in 2023, and Tigana, which was published in 1990, and The City in the City, which was published in 2009. And then the last book that I picked up but did not read in March is The Stolen Heart by Andrey Krukov. This is translated from Russian by Boris Dralyuk. This is the second in a series of the Kiev mysteries. I love this cover and the other one as well. Where is it? The Silver Bone, which I read last year. That 60s Russian, well, Soviet style, or mocking Soviet style, I really enjoy. So in the first book, the Silver Bone, we meet Samson, our detective hero. He just becomes a detective in 1919 during the revolution. He just gets co-opted into the police force, and so that's what he does. In the second one, it's only weeks later, and he is dealing with the aftermath of the first case that he worked on and the events that ensued, and just getting better at how to be a detective, getting to know his colleagues and how to navigate the bureaucracy, and just living in Kiev in 1919, where we're still in the full force of revolution. The blurb here says, Samson Kolchenko has been assigned a most perplexing case, though it's mostly perplexing because it's hard to understand why the selling of meat of one's own pig constitutes a crime. But apparently it does, and at the insistence of the secret police officer assigned to reinforce the Libid police station, Samson does his diligent, if diffident, best. Yet no sooner has he got started than his live-in fiancée, how would you say this? Nadezhda is abducted by striking railway workers who object to the census she's carrying out. And when you factor in a thief in the police station itself, a deadly tram accident that may have been premeditated, and the reappearance of the culprit in the case of the Silver Bone, it's no wonder the meat case takes a back seat. But it is in the pursuit of this pettifogging, seemingly mundane matter that Samson's fate lies, and Nadezhda's too, for the two are inextricably entwined. This is just cozy detective, but set in Ukraine in 1919. I actually thought when I finished the first one that I would get this one on Kindle because, it didn't, Kindle cheap, because it didn't spark that much joy. But then I bought it. It just happened. And it was great. It was fine. It's not something that I would probably read again. It's not something that I think about a lot. It was just a good little detective mystery, and I will read the next one if there is a next one. It was great. It was fine. It was perfectly cromulent and what I wanted, because it turns out this year I'm really enjoying mysteries. We'll come to that in the next episode of whatever this is I do on YouTube when I get to it. There's no point telling you what I'm reading because we're months in advance. So now I can put these books at least back on the shelves, make the pile a little bit less precarious, and I will see you next time.